Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Okay, imagine, just for a moment, the ancient world. The heavens were like a stage for gods, and every storm, every harvest, maybe every new baby, it was seen as a direct message, right? From some divine hand.
Absolutely. For thousands of years, the main Western idea of God was exactly that. A personal God, supernatural, all-powerful, really involved in every tiny detail of the universe, like a cosmic king almost.
Right, a king or maybe even a micromanager. But what if the very tools we came up with to understand our world, I mean, modern science, philosophy, what if they didn't just, knock that idea down? What if they totally transformed it, pushed the whole concept of the divine in these really surprising directions?
It's a massive shift, isn't it? Profound one. When you trace the history, especially, starting around the Enlightenment, it's super clear that science and philosophy, they pose this huge challenge to what scholars call classical theism.
Which is that traditional view you just mentioned.
Exactly. The God who's constantly jumping in, controlling things, directing traffic, so to speak. The conversation, I think, wasn't always about just getting rid of God entirely. For many, it was more about forcing us to fundamentally reevaluate. What could God possibly mean in a world we're increasingly understanding through natural laws, through human reason?
And that's basically our mission for today's deep dive. We're going on this, well, I think it's a fascinating intellectual journey. We're going to try and unravel these big shifts in how we understand divinity, spirituality, following the path from that very hands-on, maybe interventionist deity towards concepts that are much more abstract, maybe more naturalistic, universal principles.
It's really a story, isn't it? About how our growing scientific picture of reality, plus some really deep philosophical thinking, led some major thinkers to completely reimagine what the divine could even be.
Yeah. And you might find that your own worldview today, maybe without you even realizing it, is actually shaped quite a bit by these huge transformations.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just, dusty history or abstract philosophy. It's kind of a shortcut to understanding this massive ongoing change in thought and spirituality that really impacts how lots of people see the world today.
So it gets down to, what does this whole centuries-long conversation mean for your understanding of the universe?
Yeah.
And maybe your own place in it.
Exactly. It might challenge some things you take for granted. Hopefully it'll spark some new questions for you too. So yeah, let's dive in.
Okay, let's unpack this. So our journey really kicks off with the scientific revolutions. These acted like a powerful solvent, you could say,
Right.
dissolving a lot of the old certainties about the cosmos, about humanity's special privileged place.
Mm-hmm. Each major discovery, each new scientific insight sort of chipped away at the traditional territory of that hands-on supernatural God. It started kind of subtly, but it gained momentum pretty quickly.
You can think of it like this. For ages, if your crops failed or a huge storm hit, or maybe miraculously a child got better from some awful illness.
Right. Those were often chalked up directly to God. A blessing, a punishment, a miracle.
Yeah, there were all these gaps in what people knew, and God was kind of the explanation living in those gaps, actively doing things.
But as science started explaining more and more how weather works, how diseases spread, how planets move, those gaps began to shrink. And the space for that kind of direct, daily divine intervention, it just seemed to get smaller and smaller.
And maybe the biggest early step in that shrinking process came from Isaac Newton. Huge figure, 17th century. His work really laid the groundwork for what people started calling the clockwork universe.
Oh, Newton. Yeah, his laws of motion, his theory of universal gravitation, they were just completely revolutionary. Before him, people thought the heavens and the earth worked under totally different rules.
Right. Stuff up there, stuff down here. Different physics.
But Newton showed, using this beautiful mathematics, that the same basic principles governed everything. A falling apple, the moon orbiting the earth. It was all connected by the same universal laws. He unified it all, revealed a universe that was incredibly orderly, predictable, running according to these precise, consistent mathematical rules. It was like this giant, intricate, perfectly calibrated machine, a cosmic clock.
A cosmic clock. That image is so powerful.
It was awe-inspiring, definitely. But also, maybe a little unsettling for some people, this idea of a grand, self-regulating mechanism.
And well, if the universe could run on its own, like
Yeah.
a perfect clock that just keeps ticking, did it still need God constantly tinkering, constantly intervening?
Exactly the question. And that led straight to this philosophical movement called Deism.
Deism, right?
Yeah.
The divine watchmaker idea.
Precisely. Imagine a master craftsman building this incredibly complex, beautiful watch. Once it's built, perfectly tuned, wound up, It just runs. It doesn't need the maker constantly adjusting the gears.
So God for the deists was like that, this brilliant, transcendent creator who designed the universe, set up the natural laws, wound it up, and then basically let it run.
Pretty much. The universe itself and its amazing order and consistency was God's main revelation, not necessarily special miracles or divine messages that broke the laws of nature.
So this God wasn't about everyday miracles or answering specific prayers in a supernatural way. It was a God of reason, a God found in the natural laws. Divinity expressed through the order of creation itself.
Yeah, it was a huge conceptual shift, moving God from being this active, hands-on manager involved in every little detail to something more like a remote foundational principle, the cosmic architect maybe, rather than the cosmic puppeteer.
It makes sense. It wasn't necessarily saying God doesn't exist.
Not at all for most deists. It just meant that the observable universe, working by these elegant laws, was seen as God's primary and maybe sufficient revelation. You didn't need ancient texts or supposed miracles that seemed to contradict what you could see and measure.
And you can see how that idea still resonates today, right? People who feel that sense of awe looking at nature or contemplating the laws of physics, they see that as a kind of divine expression.
Absolutely. It allows for a deep spiritual connection without demanding belief in constant supernatural interference in the world. It sort of harmonizes faith and reason in a particular way.
But science wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. As the centuries rolled on, our view of the universe just kept expanding literally and figuratively. And the idea of God faced even more pressure to, well, expand along with it.
Oh, yeah. The 19th and 20th centuries, they brought discoveries that really drove home the sheer mind-boggling immensity of cosmic time and space.
Like Charles Lyell in geology.
Exactly. Before Lyell, the common understanding, largely shaped by literal readings of the Bible, was that the Earth was maybe only a few thousand years old.
Right, like 6,000 years or something.
Yeah, around that. But Lyell, he studied rock layers, erosion, how sediments build up, really meticulous work, and he showed that the Earth had to be incredibly ancient. Billions of years old.
Billions. That's not just a tweet. That's a completely different reality.
It was a conceptual earthquake. It shattered the old time scale, introduced this idea of deep time.
And then astronomy piled on. Edwin Hubble, early 20th century, pointing those big new telescopes out there.
Hubble's work was just as staggering. He proved that our Milky Way, it wasn't the whole universe. It was just one galaxy among countless others, billions and billions of galaxies stretching across billions of light years.
The scale is just impossible to really grasp.
It really is. And then you get the Big Bang theory emerging, suggesting this impersonal cosmic origin story, unfolding over these unimaginable spans of time and space, a universe that wasn't just huge, but constantly expanding.
Okay, so what does that do to the idea of God? Especially that traditional anthropomorphic God, the God who looks and thinks and feels kind of like a human.
Well, it started to feel small, maybe even provincial.
Yeah.
That's the key shift here. The concept that emerged was what you might call the inadequacy of anthropomorphism, thinking about a God who was mainly focused on just one species.
Us.
Right, us. On this one tiny planet, in a fairly unremarkable corner of this unbelievably vast and ancient cosmos, it just started to seem, well, less plausible for many thinkers. The human-like image of God, with very human scale concerns and emotions. It became harder to sustain rationally against that cosmic backdrop.
Exactly. The sheer scale of existence made humanity seem perhaps less central than we'd always assumed. And if humanity isn't the absolute center, then a God who seemed only concerned with humanity felt, well, maybe not big enough for the reality we were discovering.
That's fascinating. The scale of the universe forces us to rethink our own significance. And then, by extension, any concept of a deity that could create such a reality had to be grander, more encompassing.
It pushed conceptions of God towards much more abstract, universal, less human-centric ideas. God couldn't just be the old man with a beard in the sky anymore.
Right.
Whatever God was, it had to be something far more fundamental, more pervasive, maybe more immense, to really match the universe science was revealing. It demanded a theological imagination that could think on a cosmic scale, not just a terrestrial one. A divine principle woven into the fabric of space and time itself. And just as people were trying to wrap their heads around this mind-bending scale of space and time, along comes Charles Darwin in 1859. Drops another intellectual bombshell with evolution by natural selection.
Oh, Darwin. Yeah. If the scale of the cosmos challenged the anthropomorphism of God, Darwin's theory struck right at the heart of special creation, especially as understood in the West.
Special creation, meaning God specifically designed and created each species individually.
Exactly. Before Darwin, the amazing complexity you see in nature, a bird's wing, the human eye, a whole ecosystem was often seen as the slam dunk proof of an intelligent designer. How else could something so intricate come about? It must have been designed step by step.
Makes intuitive sense.
It does. But Darwin offered this incredibly powerful, elegant, naturalistic mechanism. He showed how life could evolve from very simple origins into all the complex forms we see today.
Not through a divine blueprint for each one.
No. But through this gradual step-by-step process, variation happens. Nature selects the variations that work best in a particular environment, and over huge amounts of time, this leads to adaptation and diversification, natural selection.
A mechanism that didn't seem to require constant supernatural input at every stage.
That's the key. His work was a direct challenge to a literal reading of the Genesis creation story, and more broadly, the idea that humans were somehow specially created, totally separate from all other life.
And this is where the God of the gaps idea really starts to shrink, isn't it?
Dramatically. The God of the gaps is that tendency to say, well, science can't explain X, so therefore God must have done it. The origin of species was a huge X. Complex organs were another.
Right.
As science, like Darwin's theory, started providing strong natural explanations for those phenomena, the gaps got smaller. And a God who only lives in the gaps of our knowledge, well, that God risks becoming smaller and smaller as knowledge grows.
Okay, so here's where it gets, for me anyway, really interesting and maybe transformative. This isn't just about biology changing. It feels like it starts to shift the whole nature of how people thought about divine activity itself.
That's a great way to put it. Instead of God being this outside force, micromanaging creation, pulling strings, some thinkers started to explore the idea of God as the immanent creative force within the evolutionary process itself. God in the unfolding, not directing it from outside.
That feels like a really subtle but profound difference.
It was a major theological shift prompted by Darwin. The idea wasn't necessarily that God made life in a single static act of design. Instead, the radical new concept for some was that God was the process of life unfolding, the inherent drive in nature towards greater complexity, adaptation, consciousness.
So God isn't the puppet master, God is the dynamism, the creative energy within the whole show.
Kind of. It allowed for an understanding of the divine that could be fully compatible with evolution. Seeing God not as the external designer who finished the job long ago, but as the underlying creative impulse of the universe, always present, always working in the now, within the natural processes themselves.
Wow. Okay. So just when maybe people felt they were getting a handle on things, Newton's clockwork, Darwin's processes, boom, early 20th century hits us with the quantum revolution.
Right, just when you think you've got the basics figured out.
The universe throws another massive curveball. Suddenly that solid, predictable, mechanical world science had been building. It starts looking really, really weird at the smallest scales.
Quantum mechanics just blew the lid off the neat, deterministic clockwork universe of Newton. It took us down into the subatomic realm that was, well, frankly, bizarre, probabilistic, not deterministic, weirdly interconnected, non-local.
Yeah, things like superposition, a particle being in multiple places or states at once until you look, and entanglement. That one always gets me.
Entanglement is definitely mind-bending. Can I try an analogy?
Please.
Okay, imagine you have two special dice, entangled dice. You roll one, it comes up a 3. Instantly, no matter how far away the other die is across the room, across the galaxy, if someone rolls it, it will come up a 3. Or if the first is a 6, the second must be a 6. They're linked.
Instantaneously. Faster than light.
That's the weird part. It seems instantaneous. They somehow know each other's state. Einstein famously called it spooky action at a distance. It showed reality is fundamentally interconnected in ways we just didn't expect.
Spooky is right. And then there's the observer effect, too, where just looking at a quantum particle changes its state.
Right. It blurred that clean line we thought existed between the observer and the thing being observed, between mind and matter. It suggested that maybe reality isn't just this solid, objective stuff out there, independent of us. Maybe it's more like a shimmering web of possibilities or relationships.
That sounds less like solid billiard balls bouncing around and more like something else entirely.
Exactly. And this strange new physics where reality at its base isn't solid matter, but maybe probabilities, information, relationships, It unexpectedly opened the door for interpretations that sounded almost mystical or spiritual, ideas that were previously way outside the scientific mainstream.
How so?
Well, if fundamental reality isn't just tiny bits of matter, but this interconnected web of potential, then concepts like a universal consciousness or a cosmic mind maybe didn't seem quite so far-fetched anymore. They gained a new kind of plausibility, perhaps, within a scientific context.
It's like physics itself started hinting at things that, I don't know, ancient Eastern philosophies have been talking about for ages. Interconnectedness, the illusion of separation.
There's definitely a resonance there for some people. The quantum world suggested maybe that consciousness wasn't just this fluke that appears late in the game in complex brains. Maybe consciousness is something more fundamental to reality itself. It offered a potential new framework for spirituality, one centered on unity, deep connection, the mystery at the heart of existence. It was a huge shift from thinking of the universe as just a collection of separate mechanical parts towards something that felt potentially more alive, unified, maybe even conscious at its core.
Okay, so science is doing its thing, shaking everything up,
Mm-hmm.
dissolving old ideas about God. But philosophy wasn't just sitting on the sidelines watching.
Not at all. Philosophy's crucial role was to wrestle with the huge implications of all these scientific discoveries, to try and figure out what it all meant. How do we rebuild meaning? How do we understand ourselves and our place in this radically new picture of the world?
The world that felt like it was being stripped of its old, maybe comforting certainties.
Exactly. Philosophers had to grapple with this vast, ancient, evolving universe, which, at its quantum level, was also probabilistic and interconnected. It was their job to try and create new frameworks for understanding purpose, meaning, and yeah, even the concept of the divine in this new scientific context, a period of intense intellectual activity.
And one of the giants in that philosophical wrestling match was Immanuel Kant, back in the 18th century. His ideas really tried to set new boundaries, didn't they? Kind of creating a truce between science and faith.
Kant is hugely important here. He basically argued that our minds, they can never directly know reality as it is in itself. He called that the noumenon. We only ever experience the world as it appears to us, filtered through our senses and the built-in structures of our minds. That's the phenomenon.
Okay, the world as it appears versus the world as it really is.
Right. And because God, by definition, would be part of that reality as it is in itself beyond our direct sensory experience and mental categories, Kant essentially said God is beyond the reach of empirical science or pure logical proof.
So you can't prove God exists using science.
Correct. But, and this is crucial, you also can't disprove God using science. God, for Kant, existed in a different realm of understanding, so to speak, not subject to scientific testing.
So he basically drew a line. Separate the domain. Science gets the world of appearances, the natural world we can measure.
Exactly. Science deals with the phenomenal world. And faith, or belief in God, for Kant, that wasn't something you arrived at through scientific evidence or pure logic. It was what he called a postulate of practical reason.
Okay, postulate of practical reason. What does that mean in plain English?
It means it's a necessary assumption if we want to have a coherent system of morality. Kant thought that for morality to make sense, for us to believe in objective right and wrong, and strive for good even when it's hard, we practically need to assume there's a just God and an afterlife where things ultimately work out fairly. It gives purpose and ultimate grounding to our moral striving.
That's a really interesting way to frame it. Belief in God isn't about scientific proof. It's about providing the necessary foundation for ethics.
For Kant, yes, it was a brilliant move for its time. It created this intellectual space where science could do its work on the natural world, and faith could operate in the realm of ethics, meaning subjective experience, without necessarily contradicting each other. They were playing on different fields.
And you can see how that's still so influential. Many people today reconcile their faith and science using something like this Kantian separation. It lets you embrace scientific discovery without feeling it undermines your spiritual beliefs.
It's been incredibly helpful for countless people. It allows faith to reside in that equally valid sphere of human experience that deals with meaning, values, and ultimate concerns.
Not everyone was satisfied with that truce. Some felt Kant hadn't gone far enough, maybe. By the late 19th, early 20th century, you get much more radical voices, like Friedrich Nietzsche famously declaring, "God is dead."
Nietzsche, yes. That phrase, God is dead, is probably one of the most startling and misunderstood in all of philosophy.
He didn't mean a literal deity had just, like, passed
Well,
away.
no, not at all. He wasn't reporting news from the celestial obituary column. He meant that the idea of the Christian God as the absolute, unquestionable source of truth, morality, and meaning for Western culture, that idea had lost its power. It was no longer credible or compelling for modern civilization. Because, in Nietzsche's view, the very foundations that supported that belief, things like unquestioning faith, traditional authority, maybe even certain philosophical assumptions, had been eroded by science, by historical criticism, by rational thought. Humanity itself, through its own intellectual journey, had effectively killed the cultural necessity and plausibility of that specific God. And now we had to face the consequences of living in that void.
Wow. Okay, so if God is dead, in that sense that ultimate source of meaning and purpose is gone, what's left, that's where existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre come in, right? With a pretty stark answer.
Very stark. Sartre famously argued that for humans, existence precedes essence.
Okay, another philosophical phrase. Break that down.
It means we're born, we exist first. Then, through our choices and actions, we define who we are, what our purpose is, our essence. There's no pre-made human nature, no divine blueprint, no inherent cosmic purpose given to us beforehand.
We show up.
We just show up. And this leads to Sartre's other famous line, we are condemned to be free. Because there's no God, no preordained plan, we are absolutely terrifyingly free, and therefore totally responsible for creating our own values, our own meaning. There's no cosmic rulebook, no higher authority to tell us what to do or who to be.
We have to figure it out ourselves, no excuses.
Exactly. We are the authors of our own meaning.
So for us today, that means the whole burden of finding meaning, deciding what's right or wrong, what's valuable, it falls completely on our shoulders as individuals, as humanity.
That's the existentialist view. It can feel incredibly liberating for some, I get to create my own life. But for others, it can feel like a crushing weight, right? The abyss of total freedom and responsibility.
So how does spirituality fit into that picture if there's no external source of meaning?
Existentialism basically transforms spirituality into this deeply personal, subjective quest. It becomes the human-centered act of courageously forging value and meaning in a universe that might seem inherently meaningless or absurd.
Where do you find it then?
You find it in living authentically, being true to the choices you make, in taking radical responsibility for your freedom, in the courageous embrace of life, with all its uncertainty and challenges. It's a spirituality found not in divine commands or heavenly promises, but in the intensity and integrity of your own lived experience, in how you choose to be in the world. It's a tough path, maybe, but potentially a very profound one.
Okay, so while existentialism was exploring that path, there was another really interesting philosophical response emerging, kind of in parallel, also reacting to science. Process philosophy. This offers a very different take on God, doesn't it?
Very different, yes, and one that aimed to be much more directly compatible with the scientific picture of a dynamic, evolving cosmos. Process philosophy, especially the work of Alfred North Whitehead, who was actually a mathematician before he became a philosopher. Yeah. He looked at the universe science was describing constantly changing, evolving, full of novelty and emergence, and he just couldn't square that with the traditional idea of God as static, unchanging, all-powerful, outside of time. That classical God seemed totally at odds with the universe defined by process.
So if God isn't static and outside the universe, what is God in process thought?
God in process theology isn't outside the universe looking in. God is intimately involved within the universe, and crucially, God is also evolving with the universe. God is affected by what happens in the cosmos.
Evolving with it, that's radical.
It is. And this process God isn't an omnipotent ruler dictating everything. Instead, Whitehead described God as a persuasive force.
Persuasive, not commanding, but persuading. How does that work?
Think of it less like a king issuing decrees and more like an ideal or a lure. God offers possibilities, potentials, aims for greater complexity, beauty, harmony, intensity of experience. God gently lures or invites the universe and the individual things within it towards realizing these possibilities.
So God doesn't force things, but kind of inspires or guides the unfolding.
Exactly. God presents the possibilities, but the universe, the creatures within it, they have genuine freedom to respond, to actualize those potentials or not. This God is also described as dipolar.
Dipolar. Two poles.
Yeah. It has a physical pole, which means God experiences the entire universe, feels everything that happens, shares in the world's joys and suffering. God literally takes the world into the divine experience. And it has a mental pole, which is where God envisions possibilities, holds the ideals, and lures creation forward.
So this God is deeply connected to the world, feels the world, but also transcends it in a way by holding the vision for what could be.
It's a good way to put it. It's a concept of God that's fully compatible with evolution, the Big Bang, a dynamic cosmos. Because God is part of that process, the ultimate source of novelty and potential within it. God is always becoming, alongside the universe.
It's a really different feel. God as the fellow sufferer who understands and the source of potential that lures us on.
Exactly. It emphasizes God's immanence, God's presence in the world and God's responsiveness to the world, which is very different from the classical, impassive, unchanging deity.
Okay, so we've journeyed through how science chipped away at the old picture and how philosophy wrestled with the fallout, coming up with these really diverse responses like Kantian separation, existentialist self-creation, and process theology's evolving God. Yeah. Now let's look at the synthesis. How do these threads come together in some of the main ways people think about God and spirituality today?
Right. This is where we see the blending of these scientific insights and philosophical reflections into concepts that are really prevalent now, often moving beyond traditional religious boxes.
Let's start with pantheism and panentheism. They sound similar, easy to confuse, but there's a key difference, right?
Huge difference, yeah. Let's take pantheism first. This is the idea, maybe most famously associated with the philosopher Spinoza, but definitely revitalized by modern science. It's the belief that God is the universe and its natural laws, full stop.
So God and the universe are identical, no separation.
Exactly. God isn't a creator apart from creation. The totality of existence, all matter, energy, space, time, the laws governing it all, that is God.
So when you feel that sense of awe looking at a galaxy through a telescope or understanding a complex ecosystem or just contemplating the laws of physics, that feeling is a religious or spiritual experience. You're connecting directly with the divine fabric of reality.
That's the pantheist view. God isn't a person to pray to, but the unified reality itself. Albert Einstein famously said he believed in Spinoza's God. He found his sense of the divine in the harmony, order, and deep intelligibility of the universe in its fundamental laws, not in a personal deity who interferes.
Okay, so that's pantheism, God, universe. What about panentheism? What's the N part add?
The N means in. Panentheism is the belief that the universe is in God, but God is also more than the universe.
Okay. So the universe is part of God, contained within God, but God isn't limited to just the universe. God transcends it as well.
Precisely. It's a way to hold on to both God's immanence, being present in everything, and God's transcendence, being more than everything. You could think of the universe as God's body, perhaps, constantly evolving and changing.
But God's mind or spirit or consciousness isn't confined just to that body. It's greater.
That's a common way to picture it. It allows for a God who is intimately involved in the cosmic process, present in every particle, feeling the universe unfold, but who also has a reality beyond the physical cosmos. It bridges the gap for people who resonate with God's presence in nature, but also want a sense of a greater, perhaps personal, divine consciousness.
That makes sense. It accommodates both the evolving universe science shows us and maybe a more traditional sense of a transcendent reality.
It's a very popular view in modern theology and spirituality for that reason.
Okay, then there's the idea we touched on with process thought, but maybe framed more broadly. God simply as a process, not a being.
Right. This really takes the insights from evolution and dynamic physics seriously. It rejects thinking of God as a static noun, a fixed entity, and reimagines God as a verb, as action, as becoming.
So God is the creative unfolding of the universe itself, the drive towards complexity, the emergence of life and consciousness.
Exactly. God becomes another word for creativity, for evolution, for the process of becoming itself. It's a very naturalistic way to think spiritually. The divine isn't something separate from nature. It is the inherent dynamism and creativity of nature.
So you witness God in action when you see a star being born, or life adapting, or even maybe in human creativity and insight.
That's the idea. It's about finding the sacred within the natural processes of the cosmos, seeing the ongoing creation all around us as the manifestation of the divine itself.
And then, pushing even further, maybe inspired by quantum physics. The idea of God as cosmic consciousness, or maybe even information.
This is definitely more speculative, on the frontiers where physics, philosophy, and spirituality intersect. Drawing from quantum weirdness and ideas in information theory, some thinkers propose that maybe consciousness isn't just something that pops up in brains. Maybe it's fundamental.
Like consciousness is the ground floor of reality, and matter and energy are built on top of that.
Sort of, or that the universe itself is, in some way, a manifestation of a universal mind or a cosmic consciousness. You hear phrases like physicist John Wheeler's it from bit, the idea that physical reality it might ultimately arise from information bit.
So God, in this view, might be conceived as the underlying cosmic mind, the universal information field from which everything emerges.
Something like that. It's highly abstract, obviously, but it's an attempt to think about a ground of being that aligns with hints from modern physics about the primacy of information or consciousness. Mind potentially being prior to matter.
Fascinating, if mind-bending. And finally, we come to what seems like a logical extension of that existentialist path. Secular humanism, or naturalistic spirituality. Finding spirituality without any supernatural element at all.
Yes, and this is a really important and growing perspective for many people today. It essentially decouples spirituality entirely from belief in deities or transcendent realms.
But can you still have genuine spiritual experiences? Awe, wonder, connection.
Absolutely, according to this view. Those profound human experiences, awe, wonder, reverence, deep connection, ethical commitment, are directed not towards a supernatural God, but towards other things. Towards the incredible reality of nature as revealed by science, towards humanity itself, our potential, our shared struggles, towards art, music, love, the pursuit of knowledge.
So the sacred isn't out there somewhere, it's found right here. In the natural world and in human potential.
Exactly. The sacred is found in the grandeur of the cosmos, in the beauty of the earth, in human ethical striving, in compassion, in creativity, in the quest for truth. It's about finding ultimate meaning and value within this life, within the natural world, celebrating human responsibility and potential within the vast, awe-inspiring universe, without needing recourse to the supernatural.
Wow. What an incredible arc we've traced today. From that very personal, hands-on supernatural God, managing the world like a king, through all these challenges from science and philosophy.
Yeah, dismantling that old image of the monarchical deity living up there and occasionally intervening down here.
And leading to this huge range of more sophisticated, often abstract, sometimes entirely naturalistic ways of thinking about the divine or the sacred or ultimate meaning.
It's like the divine, for many, has been relocated. It's not confined to a distant heaven anymore. It's found woven into the very fabric of reality and the laws of physics, in the creative pulse of evolution, and the depths of consciousness, in the interconnectedness of everything.
So the quest for God, you could say, hasn't ended at all. It's just transformed, hasn't it, into this profound, ongoing investigation into the nature of reality itself, into consciousness, into where we find meaning.
Absolutely. It really pushes us to look at the world and ourselves, maybe with fresh eyes, asking different kinds of questions.
And we really hope this deep dive gives you, our listeners, something to reflect on. How do these evolving ideas resonate with your own understanding? Do they spark new questions for you about the universe, about spirituality, about your own place in this grand, mysterious cosmos?
Where do you find the sacred or the profound in your own experience? It's a deeply personal question, informed by this whole amazing history of thought.
It's been fantastic exploring this with you today. We really enjoyed this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring.